Howdy everybody. So it's been a little bit of time since I gave an update on how the van build is going. December kind of flew by and I didn't get a whole lot done, but hopefully things will start moving a little bit faster today. I actually had intended to do a video about wiring. As you can see, I've started wiring, but that is going to wait until next week to be finished up because it turns out I was missing a cable to wire some lights together. So once that comes in, I'll put out a video about some wiring basics that I think are pretty helpful. If you want to know more about this van build, I did put out a little intro video talking about what I hope this van can accomplish and just a lot more about how I build things. So please watch that if you've got questions about what this thing is going to turn into. All right, so to fill time until that wiring comes in, I'm going to shift gears and work on wall panels for the rest of the day. And I don't really want to do a comprehensive video on how to build wall panels because I think every van and every aesthetic is a little different. But I do have a couple techniques that I've learned over time and just a couple quick tips that I think will make them hopefully much less of a pain in the butt for you. All right, so in my van, to mount practically everything, as you see, we've got tons of rib nuts mounted everywhere. So when mounting these rib nuts, you're going to have to drill holes. And I really recommend you pick up some of these twin tip drill bits. This one is made by Viking Drill and Tool. If you haven't used their stuff before, I think they just make really nice high-end drill bits. Way better than the stuff you can find usually at your local store. And essentially by having twin tips, you've got two different ends that you can dole out before you got to throw one of these away. Now the big advantages of these are if you've ever drilled with a full-length drill bit, you know that in sheet metal, these flutes will tend to kind of basically create a thread. So as you're breaking through that metal, it'll just shoot your drill bit through, which when drilling in something like a van can be an issue because you don't want to hit the skin behind it. So you really want to be careful to not drill too deep. So the advantage here is with these flutes being so short, that kind of driving motion is going to be pretty short-lived. You've only got about 3/4 of an inch before the flute is done. And the second advantage is that they're so short that you can just chuck them up. So essentially the drill of the chuck is becoming the depth stop. So you can really just cut really shallow holes if you want to. So I can't say enough good things about this idea to use these little twin tip bits for pilot holes. Great drill bit. I highly recommend them, if you're building a van or if you just like tinkering in general. All right, so you've got all your, rib nuts installed for your wall panel. And now how do you find these hole locations? How do you find the hole? Question we all ask. Here's the best way I found to do it. You want to get yourself some of these set screws that you can get that have a pointy end on one end. I'm going to link to some stainless steel ones you can get of these. I think it's less than $4 for 20 of them, and it's pretty rare you need more than 20 of them at a time. So here's how it works. You just take them, you thread them in through the thing, so they're just poking out just a little bit, right? So you put one in every single rib nut. Then, if you had your large panel, I've just got a small piece of plywood here as an example, you would line it up to where you want. And you just come through, give it a little bit of tappy tap, and then on the back side of the panel you can see you've got a perfect indent everywhere you need a screw hole. This has been far and away the fastest, least messy, and least amount of guessing to line up any holes in your van. I do this on wall panels, I do this on furniture. So if you're using M6 rib nuts, get some M6 set screws with the pointy bit. If you're going to go with 1/4 inch fasteners, get some 1/4 inch set screws with the pointy bit. Anyways, fastest way I have found to line up holes. So let's say you drilled your holes and some of them are off, or you've got one that's off and you've kind of drawn a mark, how you want to adjust it. What do you do? How do you move that hole over nicely? What I used to do is, I'd put my drill bit in the hole. As it's running, I try to rock it back and forth, but this is kind of hollowing out the hole in not a great way. What I use now, and I think this is something I wish I had known about sooner in my life, is these little barbed bits. They are basically designed for cutting on their sides actually. They've got little barbs. These are super effective in wood. There's carbide versions if you want to do this in metal that work as well. And so like that, just a much faster tool that's actually designed for kind of making these holes like that. So these little carbide bits, they're cheap and they're really helpful for adjusting your holes. All right, so another thing that took me a few vans to figure out is how to make just really nice cutouts that are perfectly straight, have nice and consistent corners. On this backsplash, that still needs a little work. I've got this recessed cutout that will go against the window. You can just see how nice and even all these radiuses are. This outside has nice straight lines all the way across. And then even this little spice rack I've got, all the cutouts are nice and consistent. And so let me just quickly show you how I can get results like this without having to invest in some kind of big machinery. All right, so let's start. We're just gonna mark a shape here. There is no real necessity for any specific dimensions, so we'll just draw some lines. For illustration purposes, let's make this one. We'll try to actually pull this off to be a nice square 90-degree corner. This one, let's do kind of a bigger radius. We'll do a 2-inch radius here. I will mention whatever size radius, at least the way I do it, you're gonna want a hole saw with the corresponding diameter. So if this is the 2-inch radius, you're gonna need a 4-inch hole saw. And then these two we'll just leave kind of in their untouched state, which will just be a very small, nice little radius, which is what's left from just the diameter of the cutter bit. So we're gonna turn the dust collection on and get cutting. Now I use a jigsaw to make my rough cuts. And I really like these Starrett, what they call dual pattern jigsaw bits. This is what they look like new. As you can see, they've got the teeth that face in opposite directions. So it just causes a lot less tear out on the bottom of the panel. But if you're working with crappy plywood like we are going to be here in this example, tear out is inevitable. So you're just going to kind of keep a decent distance away from your cut line when you're going perpendicular to the grain to try to make sure you're not getting any tear out on the part of the panel you'll actually be left with after you've made your cutout. So you can get just a couple of these on Amazon if you want to try them out, or if you want to splurge, you can just go to the Starrett website and buy a 20-pack. All right, so now we've got that rough hole cut. We're just inside the line a bit. You can see we're getting a little bit of tear out here. So if this was a finished panel, this would have gone over a line. It would have not looked very good. So you want to just be careful with that. I'm just cutting fast right now because I don't care about this, but just be careful. You'll get that tear out. A better jigsaw blade will cause less tear out so you can get closer to the line, which will make the next step a little bit easier. All right, so after you've got your rough cut out, you're gonna wanna just grab any piece of plywood that's got a straight edge that's as long as this panel cutout you're trying to make. I've just used this quite often. And then you're just gonna want a couple clamps so that you can secure that. And to actually make, the nice straight cutout, you're gonna wanna use preferably a smaller router is easier to handle, but just a little palm router like this with a pattern bit. Now you can spend a lot or a little on these pattern bits. If you do a lot of woodworking, I highly recommend you get one from a good brand. But if you're just doing this as a one-time gig or you don't know how much more woodworking you'll do, then there's some pseudo-reputable brands on Amazon. I find these bits don't last quite as long, but when they're new, they're sharp and they work well. Then you're gonna just clamp that piece of plywood along the lines you drew, and then use the router with the pattern bit to cut. And repeat this all the way around. If you come to the side with the larger radius, you want to stop before that radius starts. All right, so now we've got all our sides cut. As you can see, this plywood is complete garbage, so this bottom, this is what happens when you buy the cheapest plywood you can possibly find. Cheap plywood, gotta love it. Anyways, the front side's not looking too bad. Let's deal with this corner first. This is the larger radius. So I said this was a 2-inch diameter. So when I'm working on vans, I've done this quite a bit. I've just got some of these random boards lying around, and they've got different size holes. So as I encounter a different size hole I need, I'll just take another piece of scrap wood. So this was a 2-incher, and I could just measure, but lines up with this one. So I know that this is a 4-inch hole. This has the same radius. So what I'll do now is I will line that up to my hole on the lines I need to cut. And I will clamp this guy down as well. So this is what it looks like. We've got, we did overcut here slightly. We're just, trying to work fast. So we are slightly already cut our line there. But we've got the rest of this lined up. And now we'll just take that pattern bit again and cut away all that waste. All right, so then we can take this off and That's pretty nice there. Just trying to work faster. You know, we may have slightly gone under here, but you know, if this was a finished product, would have been a little more careful. But yeah, that's how you get a nice consistent radius. And if you wanted that around all sides, you would just repeat that. The sides that we didn't touch up, they look like this. They've just got a nice little curve that's just the diameter of our cutting bit. But let's just quickly go over what would happen if you wanted a nice, actually square corner. So for something like this, especially dealing with a cheap plywood, I would line up a straight edge here, and I would essentially scour the grain of the wood so that we essentially cut the face grain so that we're not going to accidentally splinter it like the rest of the plywood has been. So you just want to line that up, dive a little straight edge in there. So that's what we've got here. As you can see, we've gone ahead and kind of cut the grain across the top, so we hopefully won't get very much splintering. And then I like these square chisels. I think they do pretty good with these corners. And then you can usually just make fairly quick work. So that's what we've got there. Again, working quick. And that backside, I mean, it's just garbage, right? It's just peeling right off. So that would be hard to work with no matter what, but that's a pretty nice square corner. Let me show you a couple other applications that I use this for. All right, here's a cabinet that's going in my van. And as you can see, all these cutouts. I mean, I just really like how nice and, you know, there's no like irregular lines here that get in the way of the cabinet. Your eye's not drawn to any unevenness because of these cutouts. So I use this technique not only on wall panels, but you know, on cabinets as well. And I've got one more example to show you. All right, this is my main electrical panel. It's kind of got all my breakers and fuses in my van. I'll have a video later kind of explaining how everything works, but if you look at this, this is just perfect right here. You know, this cutout around these breakers, I think it just looks really professional. Something that I would have standardly thought a computer would have cut out. And then on this fuse panel, you know, again, just perfect cutout essentially all the way around. So I was just quickly show you how to do a small cutout like this. You can see I ended up making these square corners because they were rounded at first, but all right, blue tape trick for small cutouts. Let me just give you a quick demonstration. All right, so we'll draw the square out. And what you're going to do is just use any scraps of plywood you got now, preferably at least 1/4 inch thick. And if this is 3 inches, as an example, and this is 1.5, you're going to want a couple scraps that are 1.5 inches thick. So I'm going to go and cut some scraps now that will work well for that. All right, so we've got our scraps cut, and then like an idiot, I forgot I got to cut this hole out first. So we'll quickly do that. All right, so now we've got a rough hole cut out, and now we just need some blue painter's tape. All right, so then we're gonna wanna take blue painter's tape, line the hole out essentially on the line. Just wanna make a square out of it. If you have some overlaps in this application, it don't matter a whole lot. All right, if you're using scraps that you don't care about, you can just glue these to the blue painter's tape. If you do care about it, the way the blue tape trick actually is supposed to work is that you put the blue tape on both sides so that you can essentially do this. On one side, you put the super glue. On the other side, you put some of the accelerator, and then you just line them up. Got to give it 10 seconds or so, and then stuck on there. Then you've got your two 1.5 inch spacers. We'll do the same thing here. I don't care about these spacers, so I'm not going to be using blue tape on these. So essentially what you've got here is you've got your hole outlined by this scrap wood. Now you can just run your router around it. All right, so now that's nice and cut out. And with a little bit of pressure, the blue tape, as long as you didn't get any runoffs, Comes off cleanly. Still dealing with that damn tear out, but that's just a nice hole. And voila. All right, so I hope you found those little tips there on making cutouts, helpful. I think I apply that to so many aspects of the van to just make my cutouts look nice and square. And now we're going to move on to one last little tip I've got about when you're wrapping panels in fabric. A technique that works generally is to just have your, lay out your fabric how you like, then you peel back half of it, you apply your spray adhesive to half, then you fold it over. However, the bigger panel I work with, and if you're working with any kind of fabrics that have some stretch in it, I have found that as you're working your hand back, you can get some weird things going on. We'll actually distort the fabric, and if you've got a patterned fabric, it can start to look wonky, especially if you've got multiple panels and they're not quite lined up. So this is something that I have found to work better. So instead of having things oriented like this, I prefer to flip it over and have the fabric face the actual workbench and then the wood on top. What this lets me do is I can go through and I can lay out my fabric exactly how I like. If this panel is going to end up having a curve to it where the side width of fabric is essentially getting squeezed, that can also lead to some bubbling. So the other thing that this lets you do is you can just take some painter's tape, and if we just shift this over a touch, you can take a whole side here, you can tape it down, and then you can get a little bit of tension built up on the other side of it, and that will kind of help so that when the fabric is glued on, it's in tension, so that then once you're actually, once the panel is actually in position, you're less likely to get some bubbling if that is to be an issue. And of course, once you get this kind of tightened down, what you want to do is then make sure that you've got, the lines of your fabric still even. All of this looks nice and even. But then you can just flip this over. You've got a couple markers as to where you want your panel to go. I use 3M70 in kind of a slightly more industrial setup. I would recommend 3M90 as just like a go-to adhesive for most home people, but anyways, so then remove the wood, you can bump that over. Then you can take the then you can just take your wood panel and you can just precisely set it down exactly where you had wanted it. You can make sure everything's lined up essentially along this bottom line how you had intended. And you can make some little fine adjustments because there's not a whole lot of adhesion off this bottom side. And then when you're ready, you can just flop the thing over, put a little top pressure down, and then when you flip your panel over, you can just kind of make sure you've got the exact orientation that you wanted. So that's something that's worked well for me, is to put the fabric face down. Anyways, I hope some of these tips were helpful, either in the world of vans or just, if you're just making something fun. Hopefully some of these will help you down the line. Thanks for watching, everyone.